There are seasons in every life, periods when everything feels heavy, uncertain, or even meaningless, and then there are moments when, without warning, something shifts inside us. We sense a quiet transformation, as if an unseen force is guiding us towards something greater. These moments are not random, they are invitations. They are signs that the best stage of your life is not behind you, but directly ahead. Today, I want to share with you 5 unmistakable signs that such a turning point is near. As you listen, reflect on your own journey. You may discover that the very struggles you've carried are not endings at all, but beginnings. There is a moment in every human life when the familiar walls begin to tremble, when the certainties we once held like anchors lose their weight, and what once defined us no longer carries the same power. In such a moment, we often imagine we are experiencing loss, even ruin. Yet, beneath that surface appearance lies something far more profound, the beginning of a new stage, a greater unfolding of the self. One of the most significant signs that such a stage is drawing near is the strange shift in our relationship to endings. No longer do we resist them with all the might of our fear. Instead, we begin to sense that they are necessary, even sacred. At first, this can feel disorienting. Our instinct as human beings is to hold on. We cling to people, to roles, to places, even when they no longer nourish us. A relationship, for instance, may have once been a source of joy and discovery. But with time, it becomes heavy with silence, weighed down by habits that no longer speak to who we are. For many, the thought of letting go is unbearable. Yet when you are standing at the threshold of a new and better stage, something in you softens. You recognize that to release the bond is not to betray it, but to honor its completion. The love, the laughter, the shared years, they were real, they were chapters, and every chapter, no matter how beautiful, must eventually close to allow the story to continue. It is much the same with our work. Perhaps you once dreamed of a particular career, pursued it with every ounce of your strength, and built an identity around it. For years, it gave you structure and purpose. But then, a quiet realization begins to stir. The role no longer reflects the person you are becoming. Instead of dread, you feel curiosity. Instead of bitterness, you feel an odd kind of gratitude. This shift signals a deeper truth, that the self is alive, that it grows, and that endings are the gateways through which it evolves. The natural world offers us endless metaphors for this reality. Consider the caterpillar, a being that must surrender entirely to the dissolution of what it knows in order to transform. Inside the cocoon, its very form disintegrates. If it resisted that ending, if it clung to its shape as a caterpillar, the miracle of wings could never occur. Our own endings often feel like this dissolution. The structures of our lives, relationships, identities, ambitions, melt into something unrecognizable. To the fearful mind, it feels like death, but to the soul, it is metamorphosis. This is why, when you are about to step into the best stage of your life, you begin to sense a peculiar peace with endings. They no longer feel like threats. You see them instead as part of a larger rhythm, much like the setting of the sun. The day does not mourn its own passing. It trusts the night, and it trusts the dawn that will follow. In the same way, when you feel calm in the face of closure, it is a signal that your inner self has learned to trust the deeper cycles of life. Real stories often illuminate this more than abstract ideas. I once knew a woman who had spent nearly 20 years in a marriage that had long since withered into silence. For years she was haunted by the fear of leaving, telling herself that to end it would be to destroy the life she had built. But something within her began to shift. One day she said to me, it no longer feels like destruction, it feels like truth. In the months that followed, she left with compassion, not anger. The life that unfolded afterward was not free of struggle, but it was alive with authenticity. Her peace with the ending was the doorway to a more honest existence. There is also the man who poured himself into a company he founded, building it from the ground up. For years his identity was bound to that work. But as the business grew, his soul began to hunger for something more personal, mentoring young people, sharing wisdom rather than managing numbers. When he finally stepped down, his colleagues were shocked. Yet he smiled and said, "It is not the end of me. It is the beginning of who I really am." What had once terrified him became liberation. Psychologists have long observed that the human psyche resists change because it associates endings with death. Yet the paradox is that endings are also the birthplaces of renewal. Data from life transition studies confirms this. People often report their highest levels of growth, creativity, and fulfillment immediately following periods of loss or major change. It is as though the psyche, once stripped of its attachments, finally finds room to expand. When we begin to sense endings without fear, it is not because we have become careless or indifferent. On the contrary, it is because we have grown more reverent toward life itself. We realize that life is not static, it is a river, always moving, reshaping its banks, carving new paths. To cling desperately to one bend in the river is to deny its essence. To trust its flow is to participate in its beauty. And so, when you notice that the thought of endings no longer crushes you, when you can look at the closing of a chapter with gratitude rather than despair, understand that you are not becoming cold, you are becoming whole. You are beginning to see that every ending is a summons to greater life. The relationship that ends is not a void, it is a space for new love, deeper self, knowledge, and freedom. The career that concludes is not failure, it is a preparation for purpose that had been waiting in the wings. Even the seasons of your own body, youth giving way to maturity, strength giving way to wisdom, are not to be feared. They are signs of ripening, of the fruit nearing its sweetest form. In this way, the absence of fear becomes the surest signal that you are approaching the best stage of your life. You no longer fight against time, against change, against the natural flow of existence. You begin to walk with it, and when you walk with life instead of against it, you discover that what lies ahead is not loss, but abundance. There comes a peculiar stirring in the human heart, a trembling that cannot be easily explained, and yet it is impossible to ignore. Many call it dissatisfaction, a vague unhappiness with the routines of life, but it is more mysterious than that. Restlessness, in its deepest sense, is not the enemy of peace. It is the messenger of growth. It is the signal that something within you is pressing against the walls of your present existence, urging you toward a larger horizon. When you find yourself lying awake at night, not out of fear, but out of a quiet unease that whispers, "There must be more than this," know that you are not broken. You are being summoned. This feeling of restlessness is often misunderstood because our culture worships certainty. We are taught to map out our futures, to know where we are going and why. We are told that a clear plan is the antidote to anxiety, and anything that stirs unease must be avoided. But the truth is that the soul does not move in straight lines. It does not reveal its path all at once. Instead, it begins with a nudge, an inner friction that unsettles our comfort and makes us restless in what once felt secure. Like a bird who feels the winds of migration before it knows the direction, we too sense the call before we see the destination. I recall speaking with a young man who had achieved what many would call success. He had a stable job, financial security, even the admiration of his peers. Yet he confessed that each day felt like a slow suffocation. He was not unhappy in the ordinary sense. His life was not tragic, but a restlessness gnawed at him. He said, "I feel as if I am meant to be somewhere else, doing something else, but I cannot name it." That very inability to name it frustrated him, as though clarity were required before movement could begin. But what he could not yet see was that his restlessness was not an error. It was the very signal that his life was ready to expand beyond its current boundaries. Within a year, he left his position and began a journey of travel and study that eventually led him to the work he now loves. The restlessness was not his enemy, it was his compass. Many of the greatest transformations in human history have begun with restlessness. Artists often speak of a period of agitation before inspiration strikes, a time when they wander, uncertain of what they are searching for. Writers pace their rooms, musicians feel the ache of an unformed melody, inventors dismantle ideas that no longer satisfy them. Scientific studies of creativity show that breakthrough moments are often preceded by phases of dissatisfaction, where nothing feels quite right. It is as though the psyche must wrestle in the dark before the light of innovation emerges. In the same way, your own restlessness is the prelude to discovery, but because restlessness does not come with answers, it unsettles us. We want to know the what and the how, but all we are given is the why not here, why not now. And so we mistake the stirring for weakness, thinking something must be wrong with us. Yet it is precisely the absence of answers that creates the fertile ground for growth. If the path were already clear, there would be no need to expand, no need to step beyond the familiar. It is in the very discomfort of not knowing that we are stretched open to new possibilities. Think of the seasons. The trees in winter stand bare and silent. At first glance it looks like death, but beneath the surface the roots are gathering strength, preparing for spring. In the same way, restlessness is winter in the soul. It strips away our leaves, the comforts that once shielded us, so that deeper growth can occur. We feel exposed, uncertain, incomplete, but that is because the roots are working and the spring is approaching. When you are restless, you are in the season of hidden preparation. I have met many people at the cusp of great transformation, and nearly all of them describe this same experience. A sense that the life they are living no longer fits, as though the clothes of their identity have become too tight. One woman told me that she felt like she was walking in shoes 2 sizes too small. Nothing was wrong with the shoes, but they no longer belonged to her. This is the essence of restlessness, the soul demanding shoes that fit the person you are becoming, not the person you once were. It is important to understand that restlessness is not indulgence, nor is it escapism. Some might fear that to listen to this stirring is to abandon responsibility. But in truth, ignoring it is what leads to irresponsibility, for a life lived against the call of the soul eventually corrodes into bitterness and regret. Far better to acknowledge the unease, to sit with it, and to ask quietly, what in me is longing to grow? The answers will not arrive immediately, but the act of listening itself is transformative. There is also a deeper mystery here. Restlessness is often the psyche's way of awakening us to our unlived life. Each of us carries within us potential selves, paths not yet taken, possibilities waiting in silence. When too much of our energy is consumed by the roles we have already mastered, these hidden selves begin to stir. They knock on the doors of our consciousness in the form of restlessness. They say, "Do not forget me. I too must be lived." To honor this call is to embrace the fullness of who you are meant to become. Even in the myths and sacred stories of the past, restlessness appears as the precursor to transformation. The hero does not leave home because everything is comfortable. He leaves because something within tells him that comfort is no longer enough. Restlessness drives him into the wilderness, where he discovers his strength. The same is true of us. The best stage of life does not begin in certainty, but in the trembling unease that refuses to let us stay small. And so, when you feel restless, even if you do not know why, take heart. Do not dismiss it, and do not rush to bury it beneath distractions. Recognize it for what it is, the pulse of your own becoming. It is the soul's way of stirring the waters, breaking the surface of routine, and reminding you that you are alive, and that life is far greater than the cage you have built around it. This restlessness is not a flaw. It is the invitation. It is proof that transformation is already unfolding within you, even before you can see where it leads. There comes a time when the glitter of surface pleasures begins to lose its power over you. The distractions that once seemed to fill your days, endless scrolling through glowing screens, shallow conversations that circle around nothing, routines designed only to occupy the hours, suddenly reveal themselves as empty shells. They no longer satisfy. They may once have been enough to quiet the restlessness inside you, but now they ring hollow, like echoes in a room without substance. This is not a coincidence. It is a profound sign that you are on the threshold of a greater stage in your life, for when you begin to hunger for depth, it means that your soul has grown tired of illusions and is calling you towards something real. Depth is not about doing more, acquiring more, or performing for the eyes of others. Depth is about truth. It is the willingness to encounter life not as a stage for appearances, but as a sacred journey of discovery. You begin to feel the difference between what numbs and what nourishes. The evening spent lost in trivial distractions leaves you emptier than before, while the evening spent in a meaningful conversation or in silence with a book that awakens your spirit leaves you fuller, more alive. This shift in perception is not merely preference. It is evidence that your inner self is aligning with authenticity. I once met a man who embodied this change. For years, he had pursued every opportunity that came his way, chasing success with relentless energy. He built a thriving business, gained recognition, and lived with the constant hum of activity. Yet no matter how much he achieved, exhaustion haunted him. His days were crowded, but his heart was hollow. Then one day, after a moment of quiet reflection, he realized that what he longed for most was not another deal or another accolade, but simple evenings at home with his children, hearing their laughter, sharing their stories, being present in the fleeting years of their growth. When he finally released the compulsion to chase every opportunity, he discovered that the richest treasure had been waiting for him all along. The shift from distraction to depth marked the true beginning of his best chapter. The world is filled with distractions, and not all of them are harmful in themselves. Entertainment, comfort, novelty, these are natural parts of human experience. But when they become substitutes for meaning, when they are used to cover the silence that might otherwise reveal truth, they become prisons. Modern life trains us to consume endlessly, to collect experiences like souvenirs rather than to live them deeply. But the soul does not thrive on accumulation. It thrives on essence. A single moment of genuine connection can nourish us more than 100 shallow interactions. A single page of a book that stirs our spirit can sustain us longer than hours of empty noise. This is why, when you begin to value depth over distraction, you may feel a kind of loneliness at first. The circles you once moved in may not understand your hunger. Friends who are content with surface pleasures may wonder why you no longer find joy in the same amusements. But this loneliness is not abandonment, It is an initiation. It is life's way of preparing you to meet others who share the same longing, others who are also seeking what is real. It is the clearing of space so that relationships rooted in truth can take root. There is something profoundly human in this desire for depth. From the earliest myths and stories, we see heroes leaving behind the comfort of distraction to pursue wisdom, treasure, or truth. Odysseus could have remained on the island of pleasures, yet he longed for home, for meaning, for depth. The Buddha turned away from the palace with its endless delights, because he sensed that beneath the glitter there was suffering unaddressed. Depth is the universal call of the soul. It is the refusal to live only at the surface, and the courage to descend into the richness beneath. Scientific studies even echo this truth. Research shows that people who invest in meaningful relationships, purposeful work, and experiences that foster growth consistently report higher levels of long-term satisfaction than those who chase only material gain or fleeting pleasures. Neuroscience tells us that novelty activates the brain's reward system, but the sense of fulfillment that lasts arises from experiences that engage us deeply, learning, creating, connecting. What ancient wisdom has always known, modern science now confirms. Depth sustains, distraction fades. I have seen this hunger for depth awaken in people at different stages of life. A young woman, weary of chasing validation on social media, one day deleted the very accounts that had consumed her identity. She told me later, "I thought I would feel empty without it, but I feel like I can finally breathe." In that space of silence, she began painting again, something she had loved as a child. What looked like a loss was in truth the discovery of herself. Another man, long retired, told me he spent his early years obsessed with making money, but what brought him peace in old age were afternoons teaching children to fish, sharing stories, passing on wisdom. The shift was not about age, it was about awakening. When you begin to value depth, life itself begins to transform. Food tastes different when it is savored instead of consumed. Silence no longer feels frightening, but restorative. A walk through the forest is not just exercise, but communion with something larger than yourself. Even pain takes on a different quality. Rather than something to be numbed, it becomes a teacher, carrying lessons hidden beneath its weight. This is the essence of depth, seeing beneath the surface, discovering what lies within. To choose depth is not always easy. Distraction is seductive, and the world will always offer it in abundance. But there comes a moment when you realize that to live distracted is to live asleep, and to live in depth is to awaken. And when you awaken, you understand that life is not about how much you have, how busy you are, or how many moments you can capture. It is about how deeply you live the moments you are given. So when you notice that the distractions you once loved now leave you unsatisfied, do not mistake it for boredom. Recognize it as a sign. It means you are ready for more, for conversations that stir your soul, for work that reflects your truth, for experiences that awaken your being. It means that the best stage of your life is near, because only in depth do we find the richness that sustains us. And once you have tasted that depth, the surface will never again be enough. Every scar carries within it a story, though for much of our lives we are taught to hide them, to cover what is broken and present to the world only what seems whole. Yet there comes a time when the meaning of wounds changes, when we no longer see them merely as the remnants of suffering, but as the very marks of our becoming. To discover strength in your wounds is to realize that nothing in your past was wasted, not the heartbreaks that left you trembling, not the failures that crushed your confidence, not the illnesses or losses that brought you to your knees. At first, you may have cursed them asking with bitterness, "Why me?" But when you are standing at the threshold of your best stage, the question shifts. You begin to see that the wound itself shaped your resilience, carved out your compassion, and forged a wisdom you never would have gained otherwise. There is a paradox in human experience. The very things we wish most to avoid are often the gateways to our deepest growth. A person who has never tasted sorrow cannot fully understand joy. One who has never been broken cannot truly know the strength of healing. It is in the confrontation with suffering that the layers of our superficial identities are stripped away, revealing the essence that lies beneath. Pain is the great sculptor of the soul, chiseling us into forms we could not have imagined for ourselves. When you begin to sense that your scars are not disfigurements but symbols of survival, you are already awakening to a new and more powerful way of living. I recall a woman who endured the collapse of her marriage after 2 decades. In the first years after, she felt only grief and humiliation, believing her story had ended in failure. But over time, as she rebuilt her life, she discovered a self she had never known, a woman of independence, courage, and vision. The wound that had once felt like a death became the source of her rebirth. When she spoke of it later, she said, "I thought I had lost everything, but in truth I gained myself." That is the essence of strength revealed in wounds. They strip away illusions and leave only what is real, and from that realness emerges a sturdiness that cannot be broken. Or consider the man who battled a severe illness that left him weakened for years. At first he saw only limitation, lamenting what his body could no longer do. But in that season of weakness, he learned patience, empathy, and the capacity to be present with others in their suffering. When he finally regained his strength, he carried within him a gentleness and wisdom that had not existed before. He would later say that his illness was the greatest teacher he ever had, for it forced him to slow down, to feel, to listen. What seemed like ruin became a source of deep humanity. Our culture often encourages us to conceal wounds, as though they are shameful marks of inadequacy. We polish the surface, present the illusion of perfection, and hide the fractures. But what we hide does not disappear, it festers. Only when we bring wounds into the light, when we allow them to breathe, do they begin to transform into sources of strength. Jung once suggested that the place of greatest healing is found where the wound resides, for the wound is the opening through which life can enter, and in truth we all know this intuitively. The friend who has endured heartbreak is the one who knows how to comfort us in our own. The parent who has tasted loss is the one who can sit silently beside us when grief overwhelms us. The mentor who has failed profoundly is the one who can guide us through our failures without judgment. Strength does not come from unbrokenness. It comes from brokenness that has been lived through and integrated. When you are entering the best stage of your life, you no longer see wounds as something to escape, but as teachers to be honored. You begin to notice how each pain reshaped you, how each scar carries a wisdom your younger self did not have. The heartbreak that once left you questioning your worth gave you the ability to love without illusion. The failure that humiliated you taught you humility and perseverance. The illness that frightened you opened your eyes to the fragility and preciousness of life. All these experiences, painful as they were, expanded your soul. And now, as you move forward, you carry them not as burdens but as treasures. There is an image from the Japanese art of kintsugi where broken pottery is repaired with veins of gold. Rather than hiding the fractures, the art makes them radiant. The vessel is more beautiful for having been broken, its cracks transformed into lines of shimmering strength. Our lives are much the same. The wounds do not vanish, but they become the golden seams that reveal our resilience. They are the proof that we endured, that we continued, that we grew. When you see your own life this way, you understand that the best stage does not come from erasing your past, but from embracing it fully and carrying it with honor. Scientific studies of post-traumatic growth confirm this timeless truth. Research shows that many individuals who endure significant adversity often emerge with greater appreciation for life, deeper relationships, and stronger inner resources. Pain, when faced and integrated, does not diminish us. It enlarges us. It teaches us to see what truly matters and to release what does not. It makes us capable of depth, capable of authenticity. It is no coincidence that some of the wisest, most compassionate people you will ever meet are those who have walked through the fires of suffering. To discover strength in your wounds is to reclaim your power. It is to stop seeing yourself as a victim of life and to recognize that you are a participant in its unfolding. The wound does not define you. It refines you. It becomes the place from which you can live more fully, with courage and with grace. When you reach the point where you can look at your scars and say, "This too made me who I am," you are no longer afraid of life's uncertainties, for you know that even in pain there is meaning, even in loss there is possibility, even in endings there is the seed of beginnings. And so, when the best stage of your life approaches, you will find yourself strangely grateful for the very things that once brought you to despair. Not because the suffering itself was good, but because it carved pathways in your soul that made room for wisdom, for compassion, for depth. You will live not in spite of your wounds, but through them. And in that embrace, life will no longer feel like something that merely happens to you. It will become something you are ready to live fully, with all its colors, the dark shades and the light, the sorrows and the joys, all woven together into the fabric of a life that is wholly, deeply, unmistakably yours. There comes a time in every life when all the scattered pieces begin to move toward a center, when the storms you have weathered, the losses you have endured, and even the restlessness that once made no sense, suddenly seem to be pointing somewhere. It is subtle, often almost imperceptible, and yet once it begins you cannot deny it. A pull stirs in the depths of your being, drawing you towards something greater than yourself. It does not always present itself as a grand mission or a monumental task. Sometimes it arrives as a simple desire, an urge to create, to serve, to be more honest with yourself and the world. This pull is purpose, and it is one of the clearest signs that you are entering the best stage of your life. Purpose is not always a thunderclap revelation. It rarely comes as a lightning bolt that suddenly makes everything clear. More often it arrives as a whisper, soft enough that you could ignore it if you chose, but persistent enough that it continues to return. You might feel an urge to pick up the brush you laid aside years ago, not because painting will change the world, but because it awakens a truth within you. You might feel drawn to mentor a young person, to pass on the lessons your own suffering has taught you. You might sense a longing to live with more honesty, to stop playing roles and start speaking with the voice that is truly yours. These are not trivial impulses. They are the first movements of purpose making itself known. At first, this pull can be unsettling. It does not always align with the expectations that have been placed upon you. A career that once looked impressive may suddenly feel hollow in comparison to the deeper calling that arises. A lifestyle built on comfort and habit may seem shallow once you sense there is something more. Many people try to push the feeling away, telling themselves it is impractical, that it does not fit with their responsibilities, that it would be safer to stay as they are. yet the whisper persists. Purpose is patient, but it does not retreat. It will call to you again and again until you either choose to follow or bury yourself in distractions. I once knew a man who had spent decades in a high-paying job that he despised. He lived for the weekends, dreading Monday mornings as if they were punishments. For years, he ignored the quiet pull that told him he was meant to work with his hands, to build, to create. Finally, in his 50s, after a health crisis shook him awake, he left the corporate world and began a small woodworking business. He told me later, "I make less money now, but I have never been richer." The pull toward purpose had been there all along, but it took courage and the recognition of mortality for him to finally follow it. Purpose is not always about changing the world on a massive scale. It is about aligning your life with what is true in you, and in doing so, offering something genuine to others. A parent who raises their children with love and integrity is living in purpose. A teacher who awakens curiosity in a student is living in purpose. A friend who listens deeply, a healer who tends to wounds, an artist who creates beauty in a fractured world. Each of these is an expression of purpose. It is not the size of the task that matters, but the authenticity of the call. When you feel this pull, you may notice that it begins to organize your inner life. The chaos that once felt meaningless, the pain, the failures, the wounds, suddenly start to form a pattern. You see how each moment of struggle prepared you, how each loss carved out space within you for empathy, how each unanswered question stretched you into someone capable of holding more. Purpose is the magnet that draws all the fragments of your story into alignment. Without it, the pieces of life feel scattered, disconnected. With it, they arrange themselves into coherence. Sometimes people think purpose is something they must discover outside themselves, as though it were hidden in some faraway land. But the truth is that purpose emerges from within. It arises from the intersection of your deepest gifts and the world's deepest needs. It comes from listening to the whispers of your own soul and then daring to live them out in the world. This is why purpose feels both intimate and vast. It belongs to you, yet it stretches beyond you, connecting your life to something larger. I recall a woman who had endured great suffering in her youth, abuse, abandonment, loneliness. For years, she believed she had no worth, that her story was only a record of pain. But as she grew older, she felt a pull she could not ignore, to work with young people who had suffered as she had. At first she resisted, doubting herself, fearing the weight of old wounds. Yet when she finally followed the pull, she discovered that her pain had given her a gift of empathy, of understanding that no training alone could provide. Her purpose transformed her suffering into service. What had once seemed like meaningless pain became the very soil from which her calling grew. When you begin to sense this pull, you may also find that life itself begins to conspire with you. The right people appear, the right opportunities present themselves, doors you never noticed before begin to open. It is not magic, it is alignment. When you live in tune with your purpose, your energy shifts. You radiate authenticity, and the world responds. Even difficulties take on new meaning, for they are no longer random obstacles, but challenges shaping you for the path you are meant to walk. This pull toward purpose is perhaps the most powerful sign that you are entering the best stage of your life, because it signals that you are ready to live not only for survival, not only for comfort, but for meaning. You are ready to give yourself to something that endures beyond the fleeting moments of pleasure or success. You are ready to participate in the larger story of life, to weave your thread into the vast tapestry of human existence. And so, when you feel that tug in your soul, whether it comes as a whisper to create, a longing to serve, or a desire to live with greater honesty, do not dismiss it. Do not tell yourself it is too small or too late or too impractical. Recognize it for what it is, the magnet drawing you toward your next chapter. It does not matter if you cannot yet see the full picture. What matters is that you trust the pull, take the first step, and allow your life to be guided by what is most authentic in you. For once you begin to walk in that direction, you are no longer merely existing. You are living in the flow of your true becoming, and the best stage of your life has already begun. So, how do you know when the best stage of your life is near? When endings feel like beginnings, when restlessness pushes you forward, when depth matters more than distraction, when your wounds reveal your strength, and when purpose begins to whisper in your ear. If you see these signs, do not resist, embrace them. Life is not punishing you, it is inviting you. The cocoon is not the end, it is the doorway. The best stage of your life is not a dream in the distance. It is rising in you right now.